Okay, we'll call our meeting to order, and I'd like to first of all welcome our guests here, Mr. Oakey, Mr. Pamick, Mr. DeMay. Thank you very much for coming here. And with that, if you could keep your presentations to 10 minutes or less, I would appreciate it, and then we'll go to questioning. And from Merit Canada, Mr. Oakey, we'll start with you.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to participate in this study. I'll focus today on the need for open tendering of all contracts that involve federal funds. Only through a system of open tendering can you ensure competition and respect for taxpayer dollars. I will return to that point shortly, but first it is important to understand more about Merit Canada and the role our members play in the construction industry. Merit Canada is the national voice of 8 provincial open shop construction associations. Open shop companies and workers build more than 70% of the industrial, commercial, institutional and residential construction projects across Canada. Of the 1.26 million Canadians working in construction, 900,000 are in the open shop sector. Despite mischaracterizations by some, the term open shop simply describes a workplace where membership or non-membership in a union is not a condition of employment. In the construction sector, it specifically refers to a situation where owners, developers, or general contractors do not consider the union status of a contractor's employees when awarding a project. For our members, the term means freedom of choice and fairness in the workplace. The fact that 70% of construction in Canada is carried out by open shop companies demonstrates the importance of our sector. It also demonstrates the need for those companies to be involved in bidding on public sector contracts, since they form such a large part of the competitive pool in construction. Instead, far too many jurisdictions across Canada continue to practice closed tendering. There, bidding on public sector contracts is restricted to specific unionized contractors as detailed in collective bargaining agreements. Our message is very simple. When government funds infrastructure, all qualified contractors should be allowed to bid on those projects. A degree in economics is not needed to understand what happens when you shut out 70% of the construction industry from competing on public infrastructure. Costs go up and quality goes down. Some U.S. studies suggest that closed tendering rules increase the cost of construction between 12 and 18%. And federal procurement rules would never allow union-only schemes for projects that it exclusively funds. Yet far too many jurisdictions have rules that limit competition. For example, the federal government recently contributed $28 million in stimulus funding to a project in the city of Hamilton. Of the approximately 260 qualified contractors, only 17 had workers registered with the union that the city rules require. So the other 243 contractors, or 94% of the available workforce, some of your constituents, were not even allowed to bid or work on this project. We believe this is unfair and only serves to increase the costs and keep some of your very constituents from working on public infrastructure projects. Federal funds are collected from all taxpayers. It is unjust that companies that pay federal taxes and workers that pay federal taxes are precluded from bidding on contracts paid for with their own tax dollars, simply because they are not part of the right union. Everyone should have the same opportunity to work. At a time of massive fiscal deficits across all levels of government, continued support for closed tendering is untenable. Open tendering is about fairness for taxpayers and workers. A couple of quick other examples. The closed tendering provisions in the City of Montreal, according to a 2004 City of Montreal report, inflated the initial price tag of projects 30 to 40%. And sewer and aqueduct projects in that city were 85.5% more expensive. So when the federal government agrees to cost share a $300 million project, you are potentially spending $85 million more than required just because of union-only contracting. This is partly to blame for the crumbling infrastructure across our country. Our money is just being wasted. That is a lot of new roads, bridges, and public transit that are simply not being built. A couple of quick other points that you may not be aware of that happen when the federal government funds these types of projects. They are not actually funding infrastructure, but in some cases political causes. For example, the building and construction trades collective agreements require employers those same ones that had the exclusive right to bid on the project, to fund their Canadian Political Action Fund. IBEW collective agreements allow for workers to be taken off the job site to engage in other organizational activities. And PSAC, the federal public sector union, has in their collective agreement for work that involved construction a requirement that employers pay into the, quote, social justice fund. Others require payment into a sports and entertainment fund, and some others a, quote, promotion fund. Is this really a good use of scarce infrastructure dollars? And can cities really claim poverty when signing contracts that require them to divert money that should be going to build schools to pay for a sports and entertainment fund of a union? To sum up, open tendering is a partial solution for the massive fiscal problems facing every level of government, offering a more competitive bidding process that will lower project costs. Closed tendering is anti-competitive, it's inefficient, and it's indefensible from a public policy point of view. And it is time to end this practice for any project receiving federal funds. If you would like more information, I invite you to view our website, opportunitytowork.ca. Thank you again for the invitation to appear, and I turn it over to my colleague, Walter Pamick, who has some other comments.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today, and it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you. I'm a local Ottawa electrical contractor, small business owner, and there are many schemes that we have to contend with in the construction industry, free and open tendering being a very important one that shuts us out of being able to bid on projects. Just this weekend, I was reading the local Ottawa Citizen, and I saw that there was a tender here for the Ottawa International Airport. And if you read the fine print, it says here, subject to local union affiliations. So I find it rather disgusting that my tax dollars go into projects that I cannot bid on for no other reason other than my employees choose to be union-free. 70% of the construction workforce in the entire country of Canada is union-free, so it really shuts down a tremendous amount of companies very similar to mine. The Ottawa Conference Centre is another classic example that was a union-only project that shut us out for absolutely no other reason than the fact that, again, my employees refuse to belong to a union. I shouldn't say they refuse to. They have the option if they so wish. They just choose not to. We have stabilization funds that are utilized against us. These are funds that the unions collect from their employees in order to use those funds to bid against us. We have ratios. I'm not sure if you are aware. My company employs approximately 30 electricians and 10 apprentices. We are required to have 3 electricians for every apprentice, that we wish to hire. As an example, if my company was in Manitoba, where they have a 1-to-2 ratio, I could actually have 60 apprentices for my 30 electricians. We bring into the mix the Working Families Coalition, an organization that has been very, I'll say, strongly opposed to free and open tendering, and who likes to have many of these restrictions put in place. I realize this is more of a provincial issue than federal, but it's just one more issue that makes it very difficult for organizations and our companies like mine to bid on these types of projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr.
Oui, mon nom est Jocelyn Dumais. Je suis aussi un...
I'm also a contractor in Ottawa. I'm a resident of Quebec. And on 19th of September in 2011, a lot of people don't know that date, but on that date, the Supreme Court of Canada stated that the liberty to be a member, freedom to be a member of a union also included the freedom not to be a member of a union. And I know that I'm very familiar with that case. I've been involved with it since the beginning. But curiously, today my company cannot bid for certain federal government contracts because it would seem that the federal government has not understood the meaning of the decision rendered by 8 out of 9 Supreme Court justices, which said that no one can be obliged to be a member of a union. And in 2013, I am still excluded from certain construction sites because the federal government is not respecting this decision. And for people who would like to defend the system because we were challenging the Quebec Labour Relations Act, and under this legislation it states that all workers in Quebec have to be union members, and the judgment was issued on the 19th of September 2001, but today still this document proves that each week 20 to 30 people are being charged in front of the court in Gatineau because they have worked or have dared to work without having the necessary papers. I have documented this for a year. It's like this every week. And Mr. Kadir, you perhaps have noticed that at the Quebec court, it's not only 20 or 40 people who are charged. We're talking about the cost of justice here. And I think that justice dollars could be better spent than convicting people who dared to work. We are recruiting people abroad to come here, and people who live here are not allowed to work because they're not union members, and they're facing fines of $500, $800. That's happening all the time. So that those who say, like Mr. Coulombe said last week, who defended the Quebec system and said it was just fine, I can only object. There's too much injustice, unfairness. Where is the freedom of association? Where is the freedom? Yes, there is freedom of association, freedom to form a union, but there should also be freedom to bid for projects being tendered by the federal government without being a union member. And certain large companies which have agreements with unions, I understand, for example, PCL, which has an agreement with a number of the unions, and they are obliged to hire unionized workers, and the federal government should object to that, issuing contracts to members who are unionized. There's a cost for that. Each worker, there are benefits that have to be paid, but the costs are approximately 20% for each employee. And we have sent our armed forces out to defend liberty everywhere else. But what's happening here in Canada? We force people to be union members, and when they don't, they are brought before the courts, and some of them have to go to prison. Is that what Canadian justice is all about? And did I fight for that? For 10 years, so that I received satisfaction by the Supreme Court in 2001. In 2013, things are going on as they happened before before this court decision, and I should have the right to work, as do unionized workers, on federal sites, because it's my money, it's the money of all Canadians, and I would like all of my employees to be able to take advantage of these contracts, and that is not the case presently. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our guests for being with us this afternoon. I would like to recall that the purpose of our study is to see how competition can allow us to take a better advantage of our construction dollars. So in your opening speech, Mr. Oakley, you talked about an increase in costs followed by a decrease in quality if in the case of a closed shop competition. And you quoted, and I don't know if there's a direct link between the incidents, you mentioned significant increase in costs in some place, a very great increase in costs, for example, as occurred in Montreal. Are we really establishing a link between the tendering process and the final financial outcome of the work, or are we excluding the fact that perhaps misappropriation might have something to do with this?
Montreal, there's definitely, it's a matter of public record now that there's been misappropriation. But you take a city like Hamilton, where there's closed tendering for all city work. And there was a recent wastewater project that was being tendered, and they hired outside consultants to develop a budget for the project. And the outside consultants, engineers and others in the industry decided that, you should budget around $29 million for the project. And then, of course, closed tendering happened where only unionized contractors were able to bid. And the low bid on that project was $53 million. So it was about 83% over budget. For no other reason. No one else could describe it. It was just that there was only one union that could do the work, and that's what they were charging. They could have charged $104 million. I don't know why they only charged 53. There was no competition from outside to even make it 53. Given that it was an 83% increase, I think that was probably what they felt, I don't know, maybe was reasonable. But there's many, many projects. I mean, the City of Hamilton alone, their staff report has suggested that their closed tendering rules over the next 10 years would cost the city an additional $1.1 billion. So there's a clear link. And that's why the City of Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo, some other cities are fighting certification because once that happens and once the city is certified, then they have to use that union for all their work. And they know there's huge cost implications, and it means one of two things. You either cut policemen, you cut the amount of roads you build, you cut the amount of hospitals you build, or you raise taxes.
Merci. Est-ce que...
Thank you. In your opinion, does the competitive process that you're advocating with open contracts, knowing that I did some research this afternoon and I looked at a sector analysis for certain OECD countries produced by Bowie and Klein, and one of the points here, one of the conclusions of this study was that contrary to studies that show that competition always has a positive impact on competitive gains, it would seem that there is a non-linear relationship between markups and productivity gains. In sectors where the margins are high, the gains in productivity would be higher where there is more competition. So it would seem that it's perhaps not all sectors, perhaps it's more in the manufacturing sector where competition is higher, and it's perhaps not as important in your sector. Do you agree with this, that all of the infrastructure sector would gain by being under an open bidding, or there would be differences depending on sector?
In sectors, I can only speak to construction. In construction, most reputable studies that have been done on the issue show a premium of between 12 and 18%. That's overall. When you look at specific regions where there's further shrinkage of competition, it can be as high as 30 to 40%. So the question I think really that governments have to ask is, why would they want to pay 30 to 40% more for public infrastructure simply to restrict bidding? There's no reason to do it for quality, safety. There's no reason to do it. So by allowing it to happen and by other levels of government funding projects that are under closed tendering provisions, you're paying up to, in the City of Montreal report on aqueduct projects, 85% more. So I know as a citizen, if I'm funding a $100 million or a $1 billion subway expansion or hospital expansion, I'd rather have 2 hospitals than throwing $85 million, down the drain, because there's no reason for it to happen.
Merci. J'ai encore une minute?
Thank you. I still have a minute, 2 minutes, 1 minute, okay. My next question is for Mr. Panic. In your presentation, you seem to be making a difference between the ratio of electricians, accredited electricians, and apprentices, where there would 2 for 1 as opposed to 3 for 1. Or can you, in spite of this difference, can you state that the quality of the workers is the same in one sector as in another?
Construction sector, sir, and I can tell you that the formalized training that electricians and apprentices go through in the province of Ontario is exactly the same regardless whether you are an open shop or a closed shop tradesperson. I believe this is also very true for virtually every other province in Canada.
Le fait que le nombre de
Fact that the number of apprentices that electrician must supervise is higher, does that have an impact on the quality of the work or the training?
No, we've never seen any studies that show that whatsoever. In reality, many provinces, if I look at Manitoba, as I mentioned before, they have a 1-to-2 ratio, so 2 apprentices to 1 electrician. British Columbia has no ratios whatsoever. Alberta has other schemes where senior apprentices don't factor into the equation. The reality is that work today is inspected by electrical safety authorities, it's inspected by building inspectors, by engineers. Company just wouldn't be in business if they didn't produce good quality work and good quality people.
Monsieur Cadet.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
I'm from Montreal, and the way that you're talking, it's like you're making a link between union and collusion, and I have a problem with that, okay? And I'm a radical center, so I'm not a bias. So I'm trying to understand here. If you have collusion with 5 companies who just among themselves say, okay, this is your time, and it will have a hike because at the end of the day, it's not just based on the bid, it's based also on the future extras. Explain to me, or correct me if I'm wrong, why you say that the fact that it's a closed, and I'll come back to that. Why? Because it's a closed bid and that you need to have the unions, that it will have direct impact on the price itself.
I think every other jurisdiction that has union-only contracting, it has shown that it increased costs. I do think that there's another premium being paid that's a matter of public record. I don't think anything is there in terms of the union-only dynamic. There is sort of collusion, alleged collusion going on among contractors. But the fact that, and we can, if you want to get back, we'll talk about the closed shop versus open shop in terms of productivity. But if you look at cities that don't have that other element that Montreal is being, is being highlighted for Montreal, you still have a price premium. So wherever you shrink wherever you shrink demand, wherever you shrink supply and you have the same demand, the prices are going to go up. So you limit the amount of people that can work because those who don't want to join a union aren't going to work. And you have 5 or 6 large contractors that get all the bids, so that increased costs as well. So it's not just union only, it's one part of it. But it definitely has an impact.
So basically you're anti-union, period.
No, not at all. I think employees that choose to belong to a union have every right to do so as they exercise their free choice. But I also don't think that employees on Monday that vote not to have a union are required to join a union by government simply to work in construction on projects. I think that is a fundamental, that goes against the fundamental charter right against forced association.
Personally, what I believe is that maybe if you impose the lower bidder all the time, it will have an impact at the end, and that provoke collusion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the situation. That's point number 1. Every time you will say this, take the low bidder. You don't necessarily have the quality, and it will have an impact at the end.
Obviously, we're not proposing. I just want to clear our organization's position. We're not proposing the lowest bid that doesn't meet all relevant, safety requirements and other things. Price is but one element. I just don't think that whether or not on Monday you're not a unionized contractor and on Tuesday you suddenly have the right to bid.
The other situation is that usually the federal government is a partner, financial partner, like where if you have a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 with the infrastructure program, the master is kind of the municipalities where the province accept and we're just sending the money. So talk to me directly of, we have the Pont Champlain, that will be a federal project. There's the one with Detroit too. do you have some specific example of, because I understand what Mr. Dumais did in the past, and I'll come back to Jocelyn afterwards, but what's the reaction of the department when you're talking to officials regarding what you're pointing out, that you want an open bid instead of a closed bid?
Right. Well, we're just starting our campaign to raise this with officials and MPs and others. Overall, people, I think, are supportive of the principle. I think you have identified where some of the opposition will come from and where some of the details have to be worked out. We actually think the federal government has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that when they transfer $100 million, that it actually is spent in a proper way, and that all of the taxpayers that pay into that fund are able to access, regardless of whether union contractors can bid, non-union contractors can bid, and let the best bid win. I think all levels of government have that responsibility. I would love it if all cities across the country had that. Some do, some don't. I'd love it if all provinces do. Some do, some don't.
Vous êtes un vétéran, on vous connaît depuis très longtemps.
You're a veteran, and we've known you for a long. We were aware of what your battles you've been involved in, and what is the reaction when we can lobby for a week and then take a coffee with the minister, for example? And what do you mean? In what sense? If you say that the decision is not being respected, Supreme Court decision, when we say that in order to bid on a certain construction site for the airport and here in Parliament, the general contractor has to sign with a union, and if I'm not a member of that, I don't have access to that construction site, so I'm penalized because I am not unionized. As Terence has said, we can be a union member and have a choice, but there should be no penalty for choosing not to be a union member. And this is what's happening to me. I am penalized because I am. Have you talked to the project officers and you said why I do not have right the bid? No, we always deal with the general contractor because he's the person who. This is the person who gets the contract, because there doesn't seem to be a policy in that regard. My problem is that I have the impression that each time the unions have sort of a broad back. Everything is being thrown so on the union's back. So when there are these closed bids, closed tenders, and when we want to make sure that we have a appropriate price quality. We're not necessarily attributing all of this to the unions, but perhaps people like me, there aren't enough of us to defend our rights, and we are simply ignored by the machine. Perhaps the union lobby is stronger, and businesses who deal with unions have an advantage, but businesses such as mine, who are part of these 70% of candidates who are not, are excluded. And if there were choice, if it's were written in government contracts, for example, we're talking about the Champlain Bridge, that we cannot oblige companies or to have unionized workers. We understand that we have to respect the legislation in Quebec, but elsewhere, in Toronto, for example, I'm talking about federal projects, I know that there's no provincial act there, and there should be clauses that would stipulate that on our federal construction sites, there should be freedom of choice.
Mr. Poilievre for 7 minutes.
Monsieur Dumais, êtes-vous en faveur?
Mr. Dumais, are you in favor of preventing unionized companies from competing? No, you are willing to compete with them.
Ready to compete with anyone, union or non-union. The only objection that I have is that if I'm non-union, well, I can't compete with those that are in the union.
So you're not suggesting that unionized firms should be prevented from bidding on contracts?
No, on the contrary.
Vous suggérez que les entreprises non syndiquées
We're suggesting that non-unionized businesses have the same right. Yes, that they have the same right, because the unionized businesses who are getting the contracts, they don't, that they wouldn't have to oblige their subcontractors, that they would not have the right to exclude non-unionized workers and companies. In Quebec, you have a construction. No, I'm a Quebec resident, but my business is in Ontario, and so your business is prevented from working in Quebec. I've never worked in Quebec, like a number of people in the Gatineau region, because of the union requirement. And it is possible to choose to not to work if you are not unionized. So you are totally excluded. I am prevented from working in Quebec unless I submit, or unless I conform to the regulations, to the law. But if, you know, the union were to, if I were to be told I have to go to church tomorrow morning, I wouldn't go. I think we have freedom of religion and we should have freedom of association. Are you following the Charbonneau Commission hearings? Yes. Have you any thoughts to share with us? What is happening at the Charbonneau Commission, I don't know. I think people must have been living in some kind of a cloud. I haven't learned anything new, and I don't think we're going to learn anything at all. When we hear about collusion, we know that the Quebec system is perfect because the businesses have to get together and unions have to get together. So when people get together, when they consolidate and they work together, they talk about business. So it show, you know, we've heard before the Charbonneau Commission that they, you know, that contractors have been talking to MPs, etc. That's nothing new. Is there something in the system that promotes collusion? Well, to get back to the case of Quebec, where all of the contractors and all of the workers have to form associations, that has to lead to collusion. When we're together in a family, we talk together and we share things. And that's where the problem lies. Because if we limit the number of contractors who can bid, or on a large project, or if the general contractor is unionized, we limit the number of subcontractors who can bid, that's collusion. If we were to liberate, if we were to open the system to competition, and if there were more bidders, would that help us to avoid the type of problems that we're seeing before the Charbonneau Commission? There's no definitive answer. When a decision is made, I've always believed that a decision is good for some time, because people who are crooked will always find a way to get around any regime. If markets were to be opened, that would bring fresh air into the industry, and it would be a good thing to do. And if there were more real if there were more real monitoring instead of commissions, it would be helpful for the Canadian public.
With unionized contractors.
Of course. We respect the right of all qualified contractors to compete, and we accept the results of that competition.
So you're not asking for a change that would require governments to pick your members in a competition?
No, that would go against every one of our founding principles.
You're asking for all players in the market to have the same level playing field.
Exactly.
And can you provide a list of, I think it was Mr. Pamick who said there was federal procurement that was limited to union-only contracting. Can you provide a list of recent examples of that?
Sure. I mean, we have. I mean, it's usually done at the contract level, so we'll provide that. But there's also some great examples where the federal government in some recent Nova Scotia agreements have actually written into the contract that there'll be no union-only schemes and no sole sourcing contracts. So there is a precedent for the federal government doing this. I think we just need.
Can we get a copy from the analyst of that the clause?
Yeah, I have it. I have it here as well.
So there's a clause right now in one of the provincial agreements which requires open competition for federally funded projects.
It says no union-only schemes and no sole source contract.
All right.
Have that forwarded just, and maybe the clerk could distribute it to all the members.
Time check, Chair. How much time do I have?
You have about 45 seconds.
So, how much more expensive is it to ban union-free businesses from competing?
Well, it's on average 12 to 18% overall, and in specific regions where there are, let's say, 80% of all construction companies are union-free, the cost goes even higher. So in an area where you have, more 60-40% union-free versus union, the differential is a little bit different. But in the province of Alberta, where it's closer to 90% of construction is open shop, when you have union-only requirements, it's even more expensive because the pool of workers and contractors that you have to go with is so small.
So basically, when you have municipalities claiming that they have no money and there's an infrastructure deficit, one area that we might want to look is eliminating that 20% price inflation that comes from banning the majority of workers from competing for construction jobs.
Absolutely. There's an extra, between 30 and 40% that's just left on the table.
Okay, thank you, and we'll now move to Mr. Adler's 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here this afternoon. This is a very interesting topic, and I was intrigued by a number of things, and there's one area I want to get to that a number of my constituents have asked me to bring up with you, but I'll save that for the second half. I want to begin by just following up on what Mr. Poilievre was talking about in terms of the 12 to 18%. So you're telling me that my constituents in York Centre and Toronto are paying higher taxes, are having to live with less services, are having to endure crumbling infrastructure, and the Gardiner is a really good example of this, having to potentially pay road tolls in order to take advantage of new roads. This doesn't seem right. And how do I, as a member of Parliament that represents them, explain that to them? Like, it just doesn't seem fair. Could you please comment on that?
No, I'd love to. I mean, one of the things that you could do as a member of Parliament is say to them, we don't have any control over projects that the city and the province fund directly, but as your member of Parliament, I will ensure that those funds that we as the federal government transfer will have strings attached to ensure that you get the best value possible, and also that all of your constituents are actually able to work. Because in your riding, I suspect it's like most ridings in Ontario, where 70 to 80% of construction done is union-free. And those very constituents of yours that may come and ask you, why are they paying higher taxes? They may show up and say, why am I unemployed now? Because I can't work on that project. And it's the only project going on right now.
See, I hear this all the time when I'm out canvassing or when I'm at events. People come over to me and it's mainly the municipal tax, the property taxes, that are just, they having to pay being forced to dig deeper into their pockets every single year. And they're paying more and they're getting less in return. Like, I remember we used to have in Toronto garbage pickup twice a week, and then on a third day we'd have recycling picked up. I remember being able to go to the skating rink at my community center and not have to pay to use the ice. I mean, I thought this was all covered in my taxes. But there's been all these user fees that have now been attached to a number of the services that are that we have to take advantage of, but we thought were being covered in our taxes. So there is we are being forced to, our municipal governments in any event, and Mr. Polyev had made reference to this, are always coming to us and asking for additional funds, and we have, indexed according to inflation the money that we are guaranteeing to them through the gas tax and the GST. But there's a whole pot of money out there that if only fairness was injected into the system, if only the right to work was made available to whoever wanted to work, we could save a lot of money and we could have an infrastructure that we could be proud of instead of one that's crumbling and having to force our taxpayers to pay more and more in tax at the municipal level. Is that true?
I think so. It's one of many areas where municipalities can look for savings. I mean, there's a famous quote from, I think it was the chief of police for New York City said, I can easily pay for the police officers who are on the street. I can't pay for the three, the other three that are retired. So there's a whole bunch of ways where, costs can be contained. I think open and fair procurement practices are definitely one. And if you look at, I quoted, the City of Montreal, the City of Hamilton, the City of Toronto is another one. There's, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent that, could still be spent, or they could be saved and diverted to, 2 schools as opposed to just 1.
Exactly. How much time do I have, Chair?
You have 2.5 minutes.
Perfect. Now, a number of my constituents have major concerns about some of the activities of some of the unions recently. Now, just going back to when the checkoff system was put in place, and Chief Justice Rand, who's now called the Rand formula and all that. So that was really designed for, that money was to be taken from, checked off from union membership to be used for collective bargaining purpose to advance the interests of the worker. It has now become a cash cow for a lot of unions to engage in activities that really have absolutely nothing to do with the collective bargaining process. And one example, recently, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, for example, and this caused a huge outrage in my riding, that they had sent a couple of people to what they called Palestine and said that the Israeli government was engaging in gross human rights abuses, and that Canada was complicit in this, and Canada, by virtue of supporting Israel, was committing war crimes. This is the kind of thing that they are using hard-earned money that workers who work tirelessly have to pay into, and I see you make reference to it here in a social justice fund, sports and entertainment fund, promotion fund. If I don't believe in the cause that my union is promoting, and a lot of the workers who came to see me, many of the postal workers, said this is an absolute outrage, and I have no recourse. I have to pay this. Could you comment on the activities of unions and how this is gone beyond? My union dues have gone beyond what they are intended for.
Yeah, I've done a lot of commenting on the RAND formula, and I actually challenge most people who seem to know the RAND formula. I don't think any of them have actually read it, because it's clear that in the decision, and it was a decision for one union in one specific case to settle a strike. It was never meant to apply to every union. He actually says in the ruling that if this was applied to other unions, it would actually be detrimental to them because they were not mature enough to handle it. He also says that right in the ruling that it's for the law of your employment, your union contract. It isn't to take forced dues from workers to pay for political or social causes. You cannot collective bargain away my political speech. It's just a fundamental principle. But to sort of link it to the issue we're here to talk about today is that very Union Peace Act requires employers, the ones that have the exclusive right to bid on contracts that they let for constructions, to actually pay into that fund. So in a sort of, in a roundabout way, the federal government is giving tax dollars, which then are transferred into union dues, that then go to pay for construction, that get diverted into, boats for Gaza.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cash, 5 minutes.
Well, that was a pretty outrageous statement. It's nice to hear the member opposite there, Mr. Adler, talk about the City of Toronto. I think he's been here for a couple of years, and I've never heard him mention the city, and now he's going after the taxes of the municipal government. Maybe you've got it confused. If maybe your government hadn't abandoned the City of Toronto, maybe the taxes on people's
Point of
property
order, Mr. Chair.
might have actually not necessarily had to be raised. Like
Point of order,
Speaker.
Mr. Adler, was
No,
it?
I raised a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Oh, it was Mr. Watson, sorry.
Yeah, I think this is...
Mr. Cash, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I've seen his tactics at Heritage too, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. But this is for questioning the witnesses, not the members on this side of the table.
Okay, it's not a point of order. Mr. Cash.
I wanted to clarify one thing that you said about the police chief of New York, I think, or the mayor, who said, you know, I can afford to pay for the police I have on the street, just not the 3 that are, I can afford each police officer, but not the other 3 that are retired. So what would he do with the other 3?
Well, I'm just saying that it's a huge strain on municipal budgets.
So in my riding at Davenport in Toronto, I have a lot of members of Local 183 Liuna, Local 506 Liuna, the Carpenters, Local 27. And, you know, when I go door to door in my riding, I have a lot. In fact, I live right between. My neighbors on both sides are retired construction workers. And they are in good health. And they're happy. They can afford their homes that they're living in, which is in Toronto, as you may be aware, is quite a feat. And in both those instances, these are men that immigrated to Canada with very little education, and one of the first things they did was got a job where they ultimately were able to join a union. They were actually nurtured by the union. Their families were nurtured by the union. They actually integrated into the city, and in fact made my city the great city that it is. But when I go door to door, you know, I'll knock on a door and there'll be an elderly man there who's just in real rough shape. House is falling apart. And you know when I talk to them and I ask them where they worked and whether they had a union, and I got to tell you, almost 10 times out of 10, if that elderly gentleman is struggling, or if his wife is struggling, if she's a widow, I can tell you almost 10 times out of 10, that man did not have a job, did not have a unionized job when he was younger. His work was not in a unionized shop. What I'm trying to get to the point of here is that, you know, while you say on the one hand, hey, you're into, an even playing field, you're not trying to change anything about unions, you just want to be able to bid on their jobs. At the same time, you're trashing the RAND formula, as your friends in the Conservative caucus over here are. You're missing an essential point, which is that these workers, through their union, contribute enormously to the communities in which they live. And you talk about these sort of open tendered bids as though there's some kind of panacea for all of what's ailing the economy. Meanwhile, today we see that the Conservative government has somehow lost, they can't find $3.1 billion. And so, you know, I think it's really rich to say that somehow all these problems have to do with unions. I got to say that in my riding in Toronto, I've got a lot of union members, many different kinds of union members. I got janitors who are facing privatization and the loss of their job security and the loss of their pensions, and you know, this kind of insecurity creates unqualified amount of stress, unquantifiable amount of stress on people, and the expense that we're going to incur down the road for workers who aren't properly protected. Well, that's not factored into your bottom line. I can tell you that.
Can I comment on that?
So my question So my question to you is, the unions in my city have done an incredible job participating in the building of the city, but you know we have an untendered project in Toronto, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. The Air Rail link linking the airport to Union Station was largely done.
Yes, your time is up. We now move to Mr. Holder. 5 minutes. Point of order, Mr. Coder.
I'd like to talk about infrastructure today. So I don't want to hear about the Formula Rand or do we love union or not, or my father is stronger than yours or whatsoever. Is it possible to have a good discussion on the future of infrastructure? I don't have any problem talking about open or closed bids, but for God's sake, can we be serious today, please?
That's what we're here for, Mr. Coder, and I hope that we hear some of that as well. Mr. Holder.
Thank you, Chair. I share Mr. Kader's thoughts, and it's unfortunate that certain replacements on the committee haven't really raised the level of debate. So it strikes me that one of the things that when I heard the questions that even Mr. Kader talked about, I want to make that point. Collusion's collusion. Bad behavior is bad behavior. If it's bad, you call it out. I don't care who does it. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care whether it comes from people who are associated with closed shops or people that are associated with open shops. Bad behavior is bad behavior. You call it out. I don't think that is the issue here. I don't think this is union bad, non-union good. That is not the intention of this study. And I want to be clear that from my perspective that has to be said. So I want to get back to actually what the topic is supposed to be about, which is a study on how competition can make infrastructure dollars go further. If I might start with you, Mr. Oakey, you mentioned in your testimony, and I apologize, it was either you or Mr. Pamick, and you'll correct me, that some 900,000 out of 1,260,000 Canadian workers are in the open shop sector. That's roughly 72%. So what I'm trying to understand as a percentage, have you done any study to know whether the open shops get about 72% of the overall work in Canada? Do you have any sense of where your percentage falls in terms of the work done?
Sure. StatsCan keeps that information, and the latest report I think was 2008, and it shows roughly 70% of construction is done by the open shop.
So you get about roughly the percentage that reflects your membership in terms of the overall closed versus open shop. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
All right, that's helpful to know. You make several references to reputable studies, and you make a comment about U.S. studies as well. I haven't seen any of that. If you have any documentation that supports inefficiencies associated with that, could I ask you, perhaps through our chair, to bring that forward? That would be helpful for us to know. So now, coming back to, again, this issue of how you compete. You've certainly given us the impression that you can compete effectively if you have an opportunity, by the way, against presumably other non-union shops as well as closed shops.
Of course.
All right, and you do that now. Do you compete with closed shop organizations now?
Absolutely. Well, not as much. I mean, most of construction, apart from certain large-scale industrial projects, is done by the open shop. So we compete among.
So when you do compete against closed shops, do you win every bid? Do open shops win every bid?
No.
Does that necessarily mean that you're more efficient or less?
It means that depending on, I mean, every bid is somewhat different. So there may not be a contractor who has the staff, has the resources, so for whatever reason they bid higher or lower. There's no sort of way to make a blanket statement that, every time we compete against a closed or another open shop operator that one of those companies would win. It's very, very bid specific.
It's interesting. You made reference, I think, in earlier testimony today that you said that in some cases you haven't been able to quote in government infrastructure because it only supports closed shop tenders. Have you ever had a circumstance where the opposite is true, where they will only accept open shop tenders and not closed shop?
No.
Anywhere in Ontario?
Not that I'm aware of.
Or Canada?
I mean, we don't write. We would never ask the government to favor our members in terms of what you can and cannot do in terms of bidding. All we want is a level playing field, and quite frankly, There are members of ours that operate with a union wing in certain areas because their employees have chosen that. So open shop doesn't mean necessarily non-union. It simply means that we're agnostic towards whether you're a union member or not. You can work side by side with our open shop colleagues who are unionized, who are not unionized. A closed shop refers to if you come on our work site, you pay us, you join us, or you leave.
I want to come back to a point that is important, and that is this issue of supporting with any documentation that you have that suggests that it drives up the cost. Because when you say that, it sounds like it's an anti-union rhetoric, and I'm trying to move it the other way to the numbers. I mean, follow the money is really where we're trying to get a sense of, in the sense of trying to know to what extent it is to be. You're talking, I think, Mr. Dumais, just from a fairness standpoint, that if closed shops can compete with you, why can you not compete with them with government infrastructure? Is that fair to say?
This is what I'm saying. They have this clause. The large company, like I'm taking as an example, PCL, they are signatory with many of unions. So if, like, my own company is signed up with the Carpenters Union, so I'm not anti-union, but my laborers are not. But PCL is signed up with the labor union, so that means that I can't bid on a job where PCL is running it. So it actually stopped me from bidding on that job.
So that might be for you, Mr. Dumais, an issue of fairness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'd be more competitive than a closed shop, would it?
Yes, because on many jobs that I bid on,
yes,
they are general contractors that are completely non-unions, and I have their jobs. And they are contractors that are signatory with the Carpenters Union, which I'm okay. But this is fairness. But it's just when it comes to our federal government that I feel is not doing or is not acting properly towards my situation. In the private sector, I have no problem with this. This is the name of the game. I win, it's good. I lose, it's good. That's the name of the game. But when it comes to my federal government, I would like to have just as a fair play as the union-only company.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chow, 5 minutes.
There are two types of way that the federal government transfer money. One is, is through the gas tax, which is basically an agreement. It's a direct transfer from the federal government to provincial municipal government. In that instance, the funding is more predictable, but the federal government takes a complete hands-off approach. It's whatever the municipality wants to spend on, it's up to them, whichever way. The other approach is the Build Canada Fund and the P3s funds and the provincial federal agreement fund. So there's in these ones, the federal government have some say over the agreement with provincial government, or that it is a grant-based project. I see what you are trying to say. You're saying that the federal government should, in the way it spends its infrastructure funds, make sure that the bidding process is open. But that wouldn't apply to the gas tax funds. It really wouldn't apply to the direct transfer, right? So in your mind, do you think that the federal government should put on more conditions when there's an agreement with municipalities that there should be some conditions? So condition one could be you have to generate apprenticeship spots, for example. Your suggestion could be another one. How do you go about, in your mind, how would you go about coming to a place where you want it to be? Because right now, the funding is, in terms of the old funding, They're really, the existing funding, there's not a whole lot left because, in fact, there is a bit of a cut. It's about $2 billion cut because we used to get $5 billion. It's now down to $3 billion, so we're actually losing about $2 billion a year of existing funds. That's through the Build Canada grant program. So are you specifically talking about the Build Canada program? But that program is the old program, not the new one. The new one doesn't really ramp up until 3 or 4 years from now. Right. So I can't see how even if we want to, we would apply conditions.
Yeah, I think on the old agreements, it probably is too late for that, given that they've already been negotiated with the provinces. But I think in the new round of negotiations, it should be a condition. I also think that for any federal agency, so whether you think of P3 Canada or Canada Post or any agency that spends federal money, they should ensure that there's an open bidding process that ensures greater value for taxpayers and doesn't shut out 70% of the construction industry and their workers. So I think that would be the position. You know, if I were to make a recommendation, if I were a negotiator with the provinces, that would be the federal government's position. And the province and municipality could, you know, either continue in a closed tendering way and not be eligible for that portion of the money. I think very quickly, though, municipalities and provinces would understand the importance of having an open tendering process and therefore would likely agree to it.
Allow me to just keep going on that one, because in the past, the Conservative government have said over and over in a lot of this discussion, when I was trying to push for a national transit strategy, the government seems to have a belief that we should not tell what the province or municipality should do. Apprenticeship program shouldn't be a condition. Transit strategy, it shouldn't be a position. It should be a hands-off. Let them decide. And I keep hearing that. So isn't there a contradiction between the let them decide, let them manage because their level of government, allow the municipality to make a decision, versus now all of a sudden we are saying that perhaps there should be a condition? Because that doesn't seem to connect with the kind of ideology, would I say, the belief of the Conservative. My friends across the way, let me put it that way.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to comment on, you know, the belief of the government or, you know, the ideology of any one party. I'm here to make the case that there's both a cost, you know, there's a cost rationale and a fairness rationale to ensure that any public money that's spent on infrastructure is open to all qualified bidders and their workers. And in construction, it's especially necessary given that in some jurisdictions, only 10% of the industry is unionized. In others, it's, you know, nowhere is it as high as 30, except in the province of Quebec. You're shutting out so many of the very people that you're elected to represent that they just cannot work on these projects simply because they've chosen in their own private lives and their private decision to be union-free. And we think that's unfair.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Todt, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests here today. Mr. Oki, you had stated also when Mr. Holder asked you about it, that about the Merit group of companies, the companies that are under your umbrella, do about 70% of the construction in Canada, and that adds up to about, you know, also 70% of the workers. How does that percentage change when you go into public sector construction, which is kind of what we're talking about today? You know, where is it comparative to that 70% of overall construction?
Yeah, it's much, much lower. I mean, it depends on province. We haven't compiled. I'll get you numbers based on, you know, we're currently doing a lot of that research, but it's a lot lower in public construction. Okay. Because I'll give you a great example. It's currently not the case in British Columbia, but the party that looks like they're about to win the election in British Columbia has right in their platform that all public construction in the province of British Columbia will be reserved for only union contractors. So in British Columbia right now, that would shut out basically 80% of the industry. So you can only imagine what that will do to the cost, and also those who are currently working on those projects will no longer be allowed to.
Yeah. Well, it'd be very helpful if you could table that when you have that data through the clerk to the committee. That would be very appreciated. I had another question for you regarding your member companies. Are they held to the same safety standards, building codes, quality standards, et cetera, of any other company across Canada?
Of course. I mean, collective bargaining agreements deal with a lot of things. They usually don't deal with building codes and safety codes and other. I mean, Walter can speak to his own experience as an electrical contractor in Ontario.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, we like to pride ourselves on our health and safety record. You would not be in business if you were not a safe organization. When it comes to being an open shop or a closed shop, all the rules apply to everybody. There are no studies that we have seen anywhere that would disprove that. In fact, we looked at the province of Quebec, which is virtually 100% unionized when it comes to construction, but yet their accident rate and fatality is double that what it is in Canada. So that's my point.
Mr. Oki, if all things are equal from company to company, and I'm talking about as far as capability and the quality of the work, should price then be the only factor that is taken into account?
We believe so if it's the best quality, lowest bid. But it's important to emphasize the best quality.
But what about things like historical relationships and knowledge of a particular infrastructure project, the elements of that particular thing being part of the equation? And just as an example, if some municipality or city or province is building a new hospital or part of the process of building a new hospital, and the expansion of that or expanding an existing hospital, and the expansion of that, the hospital is looking to use some of the same materials as say the ventilation system in an operating room is extremely important, and they're very satisfied with the product they have. They believe it is the best product that's out there today. It may not be the lowest price when it comes in. You know, are those kind of exceptions that you obviously see as something being reasonable and fair to everybody, that everybody still can compete, but the bottom line price isn't always the absolute? I would agree it should be a huge factor, but is there other factors such as this that should be looked at times?
Absolutely. That's why I said best quality, lowest bid. If the ventilation system needs a higher grade of aluminum, which is more expensive, well, that's built into the specific bid requirement. If the hospital, if you're doing Parliament Hill renovations, you don't want to put up drywall in here. You probably want to have good quality stone. Yeah. So you write that into the bid requirement.
But we're also talking about things such as familiarity, right? I mean, when you have an operating room, you want the doctors and the nurses to feel very comfortable in that room.
So you design the bid.
Room after room after room is the same, right? So even when you do an expansion, you want to see some continuity there. So there shouldn't be interference to that level. But I understand where you're coming from, being a business guy myself in the past, that there are times when I believe strongly that relationship is also part of it. It's not 100% it, but it should be part of the equation and not just strictly a lowest price aspect. I had one more question for you, if I have time, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moyes from CUPE was here the other last week, and he supported actually the idea of unbundling large contracts to allow for companies of all sizes to be able to compete, which I was very happy to hear on infrastructure projects. Would you agree with this also, that that an unbundling aspect of some of these large umbrella type of contracts would be helpful to keep pricing down and to allow everybody to participate? And Mr. Moyes used the example of a gentleman in Alberta that had the ability to build schools. But he could build a school, but he couldn't build the 6 schools that they wanted to umbrella under a contract. Would you be also in favor of what Mr. Moist was advocating there?
Yeah, our members are currently struggling with that dynamic in all infrastructure. There are examples that have been brought to me as I do my consultations across the country of general contractors like you've just described, who, like you said, can build one school or one hospital but can't build every one in the province. So that's something that provincial governments are looking at. Another part of that is the P3 model that some of our members are struggling with, but they're learning more about how to deal in that space. But it's definitely a concern that they have.
And just to take that to another angle, what about the creation of consortiums that you would have the ability to come together with a group of companies in order to do that? Would that be something you'd also support?
Well, it's something that our companies are doing, and one of the, at least that's happening in the private sector. It's happening in the public sector as well. One of the conditions, though, that we think should be there is if the federal government puts in money, that they have to ensure that all through the value chain that it's an open and transparent process where just because you've signed off as a consortium doesn't mean that you can bound or restrict people from doing the electrical work like Mr. Pamick or some of the other work that our members do.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Ben for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais partager.
Mr. Chair, I will share my time with Mr. Cash. I have two questions that may have a link, and it would be up to you to answer that. I heard you say a number of times since the beginning of our meeting that there would be a cost of 12 to 18% of not having open bids. And what I would like to understand, and my question is addressed to Mr. Oki, an organization such as Merit, how is that different from a union when you offer the same thing to your own members? For example, you offer that to manage benefits programs, insurance programs, training programs. These are things that the unions always do. How can we expect to make economic gains of 12 to 18%? Because you also have these costs.
Competition tend to lower prices. If you have 10 or 12 bidders versus 1 or 2, prices go down. I mean, you see that in all industries. But, you know, thank you for that plug for the Merit Benefit Plan. I mean, we run the largest multi-employer benefit plan in all of construction. We pay, you know, health and dental benefits, life insurance, retirement plans. So in that way, you know, when Mr. Cash was talking about, you know, employers or companies that are treating their employees poorly, I'm not sure these people work in construction, and if they do, they should join a Merit member because they'll get all those benefits exactly like in the union. So, you know, I'd also think that, you know, given that we have someone who actually works in the construction industry, Mr. Pamick, he probably should comment on, you know, the competitive nature of staffing and the benefits that he provides.
Thank you. One of the things that you find that makes it, I think, more competitive in my industry being open shop is that there are no delineations, if you will. To give you a very easy example, I was an IBEW member for 15 years, and then I became an open shop contractor. And on projects that my people work on, we cross lines, if you will. We have the ability to cut a piece of plywood. We don't have to go to a licensed or carpenter, if you will, at a construction site because we're an open shop facility. I then don't have to go get a painter to paint that piece of plywood with fire retardant paint. My people can actually do that, and then we can mount that plywood and mount our equipment to it. The problem with a lot of closed tendering is that you have these actual lines that do not allow one union to cross into another union's work and into another. So you have a lot of times where people are basically wasting a lot of their effort.
Merci. Andrew?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the costs that are lower, what are they? What are those costs? In other words, do employees in a Merit shop make the same amount of money as employees in a say, for example, Local 183 of LiUNA?
Our companies don't collude to set wage prices like others. So a lot of our members pay. A lot of our members pay.
I just didn't hear you.
A lot of our members pay well above the union rate, and a lot of the cost associated with closed shop actually has nothing to do with wage rates. It's increased costs that have to do with paying into, you know, an endowment fund, a sports and entertainment fund, a hunting fund, a social justice fund, a political action fund, none of which goes to the worker. It's simply a tax on the employer and the project that gets funded to the local union. So if our members paid less, or if our members treated their workers poorly, there's an alternative. They would likely go and work in a union shop, but they choose not to. And the industry, 70%, I'll have you, 70% of the workers, despite all you know, legal opportunities available to them, choose to be union free. So the numbers speak for themselves.
If I may add, if I make a comment on that, my carpenters, my workers, they are carpenters, unionized. Theirs are not unionized. Every one of my men cost them almost $2 an hour to have the right to work. So the worker is paying for that. So the advantage with the merit contractors is that the worker doesn't pay no dues at all. My worker just had an increase. Their full rate right now will be at $47 an hour, but at the end of the line, he only has about $25 in his pocket. And you were mentioning about those pension plans, about how well the people in your districts are living because of these pension plans. But you were actually saying that 70% of Canadian non-unions are making sure that those unions workers are having a good time during their old age, and I think this is totally unfair to them.
Okay.
I'm only saying that there was a decision at the Supreme Court. Try to respect it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'll move to Mr. Polyev for 5 minutes.
Moi, j'ai entendu
I heard Mr. Aubin's comments saying that your workers have the same rights, the same benefits, same conditions of work as unionized workers. And that led me to wonder why these employees would not have the same right to participate in bids in competition for projects.
One thing, if you know, you could make the case that our employees are, you know, paid a lot less, you know, below minimum wage, or you know, are somewhat unsafe or whatever, none of which can be claimed. And I can only speak for companies that run or that, you know, are merit members who, like I said, they have full health and dental benefits, all the same, you know, benefits that closed shops have. So there's no distinction, and it's a false analogy, and I often get this when I'm at committee on other topics, and it's, you know, it's a way to sort of down or talk down about our members and their employees and how we treat them. It's just not borne out by the facts.
And do you recognize that there may be occasions where a unionized firm might beat one of your firms in a competition?
Absolutely. We welcome free and open competition.
So there are good unionized contractors out there, in your view?
Absolutely. I would never say those.
And so you're not here to suggest that they should not be part of a competition?
No.
You believe they should be allowed to compete, that workers should have the right to work for them, and that they should have the chance to win and prosper?
Absolutely.
You just want the very same thing for your members?
Absolutely.
And you're asking us to ensure that federally funded projects allow for that kind of open competition?
Exactly. That's our ask.
How many jurisdictions in Canada ban union-free workers from doing transportation infrastructure work?
1, Quebec.
How many ban employees from competing for union-free employers from competing for contracts?
La loi sur les relations de travail dans l'industrie de la construction au Québec oblige.
The Quebec Labor Relations Act in Quebec excludes them. No, that's not my question.
Hamilton, I believe Toronto, a number of other jurisdictions where union-free businesses are banned from competing for construction projects. Can you tell me which ones that you're aware of?
Well, I have a list in my submission. There are many cities in Ontario, but there's also it's also agency specific, where, you know, Metrolinx used to be a closed shop. Now it appears to be opening up. TTC, of course, is still a closed shop. So there's many, not just municipalities or levels of government, but also agencies. Canada Post tries every once in a while to put in a closed tendering clause in some of the construction that they have. PSAC does the same thing. So it's an ever-moving target. And it often depends, quite frankly, it's a very political decision.
You can get me a list
I will.
With sourced information? That would be good.
I will.
And then finally, the federal government has committed to building a replacement for the Champlain Bridge. Now, we can't override Quebec labor law. It's jurisdictionally within Quebec's jurisdiction to legislate the way it has. Do you believe that the Champlain Bridge will be more expensive to taxpayers and toll payers because competition is banned for that construction project?
Definitively, because we are limiting companies and contractors from other provinces and places to bid. And because the workers are all unionized, it can only be more expensive.
Not that you would, in an ideal world, you're not saying unionized contractors should be banned from competing on that project. You would like them to have the opportunity. You're simply suggesting that union-free companies would have the same opportunity.
Exactement.
Okay.
On parle beaucoup de...
We have, what I'm asking is that there would be provisions to, I'm not asking that we're going to exclude black people or anybody else. I'm just saying that we should stop discrimination against non-unionized workers. It's not complicated. It would automatically decrease costs.
Mr. Watson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. Some days it can feel a little like the Twilight Zone up here. Last week we had CUPE appearing on the issue of P3s and making the assertion that P3s significantly, I'm looking at their presentation, they significantly reduced the pool of bidders for contracts, and they were making a recommendation that we instead should be increasing bidders for federal contracts. The opposition were defending that particular position against P3s for restricting the number of bidders, and here we are today, shoes on the other foot. You mentioned a political decision, I think was the terminology you used, to that certain municipalities have closed shop requirements. I presume you're seeking for us to recommend a political decision to ensure the opposite occurs?
Well, ultimately, if the government decided that, it would be a decision of government.
Sure. I'd like to make an evidence-based decision in that regard. The evidence you presented to the committee today, you mentioned U.S. studies, suggest that closed tendering rules increase the cost of construction between 12 and 18%. How many studies are you referring to there? Can we get a list of those provided to the committee?
No, I've already said that I would send all the. I mean, I will tell you some of them are very long and in English only, but I'll send them over.
Fair enough. The only Canadian study you refer to is one, a report from the City of Montreal. Are there any other Canadian studies? While I might appreciate American studies, contextually they're dealing with the United States and not dealing with Canada. So
of course. Yeah, there's many other international studies. I chose to reference one, but there's
I'm looking for what Canadian studies you have.
Sure, there's a
other than the City of Montreal report.
Yeah, there's a City of Hamilton report that I have here that I can table. There's a study from Cardis that I can table. So I'm happy to do that.
Okay, I'm interested in Canadian evidence more than the United States. Not that that wouldn't be helpful to know what's happening in the U.S. You reference. We contributed $28 million in stimulus funding to a project for the City of Hamilton. Did we overpay for that project? Is that what you're You didn't say it in your submission, but are you prepared? Are you you only?
I think if there would have been a more competitive bidding process where 94% of the contractors and workers weren't unable to compete, naturally there would have been cost savings. I think the federal government is overpaying for lots of infrastructure.
Okay, that's an hypothesis. I'm asking you're saying definitively we overpaid in that particular project.
Well, and according to the City of Hamilton report, there's many other examples of projects that the federal government contributed money to that were more expensive than needed.
How much did we overpay in the Hamilton study?
I can't. I mean, they don't give a number for that specific project. Okay. But overall, they say in the next 10 years, it'll be about $1.1 billion in additional cost to the city.
Okay, I just want to be careful we're not mixing apples and oranges. You know, municipalities undertake a certain amount of infrastructure that's their own, where the federal government is not involved in at all.
The majority of which, yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to sort out how much the federal government has overpaid, I guess, is what I'm really driving at. And we don't necessarily have a definitive number in that regard.
No, I wouldn't comment on overall and $53.5 billion. I mean, there's a few models you could use, but I certainly think there's areas in which, given the restrictive bidding rules that have been applied to that money, you could, it's obvious that there's some overpayment happening.
Would you recommend that Transport Canada look into that matter, perhaps? And
I would.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. If Mr. Daniel may have some.
Mr. Holder, do you want to finish out?
I think Mr. Daniel said he had.
Mr. Daniel, certainly.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, folks, for being here. My question is kind of to take a look at the risk associated with non-union organizations. And my question to you is, you know, when you take a look at all the business that's around that the non-union folks have actually won, are there instances where they've run out of money halfway through a project, gone bankrupt, etc., or do they have the same sort of track record as some of the union organizations that are bidding for this?
I would argue they have, if not a greater track record.
Okay.
So,
do you have some data on that that you can provide us to support?
Sure.
Okay. Any other comments?
There are union contractors that go under, and there are non-union contractors that goes under. At the end of the day, ce qu'il faut voir, c'est la qualité du travail qui.
Important thing is the quality of the work. And for example, if you take 10 workers, 5 of them unionized, 5 ununionized, at the end of the day, 5 of them will be good regardless of their status. The important thing is that the quality of the work has to be checked. We're talking about costs that increased, and when we receive a site plan to work on a construction site, I put it in my truck. It's a reference plan because from the first day on, the plan is not right. There are problems, and the subcontractors have to check and make sure that everything is going to work. It will often happen that there's a conflict between the plumbers, the electricians, and other trades. The professionals have to sort these issues out, whether they're unionized or non-unionized. Doesn't matter. If there's nobody at the end of the day to check the work, you're not going to get the results. So whether they're unionized or non-unionized, there's absolutely no relationship to the quality of the work. There is a relationship between the cost, but as for the quality of the work, it's totally false to say that non-unionized workers.
Little to no risk for going to non-unionized.
There's probably none whatsoever.
Very briefly.
I think that sorry.
Just very briefly, he was out of time. So.
Yeah, so whether you're an open shop or closed shop contractor on many projects today, you've got a defined scope of work that you have to follow. You have qualified people that do that work. You provide bid bonds, payment material bonds in order to ensure successful completion of that job, again, regardless of what your stripe is.
Mr. Paul, you have 5 minutes.
Can you describe how it is that the City of Hamilton became a jurisdiction that bans union-free businesses from competing for infrastructure work?
I think, Pierre, I can, and Terrence can help me if I run into a problem here. It's no different than what is happening with Kitchener-Waterloo right now. The province of Ontario brought in card-based certification, which basically requires that if they have 55% plus of the employees doing work on the date the application for certification is filed, that organization becomes unionized. So what's happened in Hamilton was 2 carpenters, I believe, working on a weekend, 4 carpenters, put in an application for certification that wasn't dealt with within the specific allotted amount of time, which was 48 hours or so. Therefore, they missed their window, and the entire city became unionized. Exactly what's happening in Kitchener-Waterloo right now.
Wait a second here. So 4 workers signed a card, and that caused the entire construction workforce to become unionized?
That's correct. And there's many examples of this happening right across this province of Ontario with companies, and we're seeing it with municipalities now.
So, wait a sec here. I'm familiar with card check, where we go around and collect signatures, and the union takes over once 50% of workers have signed.
Well, once 50% is signed, they can have a vote. If they have 55% of the employees who have signed cards on the date the application is filed, then it's automatic card-based certification.
So there was only 4 people working that day.
On a Saturday.
So it only required 3 of them to sign.
That is correct.
And the entire workforce became
unionized.
Unionized.
We have that right now. I have a friend of mine right in Ottawa who had 2 employees who worked on a Saturday who had signed cards while his other 16 employees were at home on that Saturday.
Now, this is where the infrastructure piece comes in. How many contractors were then banned from submitting bids to the City of Hamilton for infrastructure projects as a result of this 4-person certification?
Well, it depends, sorry, Mr. Pulver, it depends on the contract, because not every contractor is qualified to bid on every contract. But there's an example in the City of Hamilton report, which I'll table with the committee, where 94% of the contractors were not able to bid. There was only, of 260, only 17 had the proper relationship with the carpenters union that was required. Therefore, 94% of the eligible contractors in every other way were banned from bidding.
So before the weekend, there were 260 contractors that could compete for work. And after this 4-person certification, all of a sudden only 17 companies could compete for work.
Exactly.
So 94% of the competition was banned. At the time, did the City of Hamilton did its officials express any concern about the cost implications of that?
Absolutely. I mean, they did public consultations. They said over the course of 10 years it'd be $1.1 billion. For instance, shortly after this happened, they let out a contract, which I referenced in earlier remarks, where the budget, by all expert opinion, should have been about $29 million. It was $58 million, the lowest bid, after it was simply union-only contracting. So. Sorry, $53 million, 93% over budget. So you can see the sort of impact that these policies, largely those policies, remedial certification and others, are provincial. And we're making the case through our Merit Ontario organization to change
do they apply to federally funded infrastructure projects?
Yes, because the federal government allows city rules to trump their own rules. So the federal government, luckily or thankfully, would never allow those sorts of rules if you wholly funded the project.
Right.
But because you're a partner and you only fund a third or less than a third in some cases, you allow the city rules to trump your own procurement rules.
So if the federal government wanted to fund the construction of a bridge, road, or transit project in Hamilton, 94% of previous contractors would be banned from competing on that work.
Right.
Because 4 workers signed a petition on a Saturday. And the Hamilton bureaucrats, the Hamilton city-level
manager,
bureaucrats,
that's right.
manager, has said that this would lead to price inflation.
Oh, absolutely.
What did he? So is there a quote you have handy? Or
well, he said over the next 10 years it'd be $1.1 billion. I'm just looking.
So within the report by the Hamilton City manager on the elimination of 94%.
Yeah, they said on water, wastewater capital projects, because those are specific, so it was mostly open shop contractors that were doing that work, so there wasn't really any closed shop contractors that were qualified to do the work. So they said it'll increase cost, quote, 40% in overall cost.
40% increase in cost to Hamilton, for Hamilton-based infrastructure building.
Yeah, it says $1.1 billion over 5 to 8 years. Every 1% increase in cost for every $11 million spent. A 40% increase for $444
What document are you reading from?
This is the City of Hamilton report.
Okay, can you table that with the committee?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Oakey, if you could table that. And there was one other document earlier.
I think they also asked for the Cardis committee or the Cardis study.
Okay, I'd like to thank Mr. DeMay.
Mr. Chairman, given that there is some time left, I wonder if we might continue questioning.
We have an agreement.
Round is it?
It's your round if you...
Yeah, I was going to... okay.
Yes,
sure.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask Mr. Oakley about his opinion on using temporary foreign workers. They certainly can be paid a bit lower wages. It'll save taxpayers even more money. Is that an area that you think some of the companies you represent that they should be doing?
I don't know in what context they can pay less than they pay their Canadian
no longer
workers. Though.
In practice.
No. Even before. I mean, the 15% differential was only if you were paying your own employees 15% below the prevailing wage. So you couldn't actually bring in.
So does any of your company
workers
that you represent hire temporary foreign
Absolutely.
workers?
Absolutely.
Is that because they're a trade? What is it? Electrician or what kind of trade are you?
All different trades depending on what the project requires.
So you normally would advertise for a Canadian worker, and then if no one, how long do you normally advertise?
Oh, it's company and bid specific. I mean, if you win a bid and you realize, oh, I'm 4 electricians short, and you need to start the bid in 3 weeks, you apply for an accelerated labor market opinion and try to speed up the process.
Which is about 1 day turnaround, right? It's you just advertise the job for 1 day, and if no one gets the job, then no one applied, then that's the accelerated part.
Well, I just want to sort of set the record straight in terms of at least construction. Temporary foreign workers are extremely expensive. It is.
That's not my question, Mr. Oakley. I'm just saying I know whether they're expensive or not. I've seen all the stats. I used to be immigration critic for the New Democrats. I'm just saying that would you encourage the companies that you represent that they would go the accelerated route to get an LMO, the labor market opinion, in order to hire some temporary foreign workers?
No, we would encourage our employee or our member companies to hire locally first, regionally second, nationally third, and then if all those pools are exhausted, then to look for temporary foreign workers.
How long do you think that would normally take?
Like I said, it's member bid specific. It's impossible to have a generalization on it.
But surely you would have some kind of standard that, in some instance, that how long do you think it would be fair for a company to advertise a job so that some of the members that are out there, they're not unionized, but they need to know that this job is open. How long do you normally think a worker would does your company keep a list of all the members? Does the Merit Canada have a list of all the, say, electrician that's available across Canada, that, or even just in the GTA, for example?
I can comment. I can comment very briefly on that. I do not know of one company in Ontario, as an example, in the electrical contracting business that has any temporary foreign workers. Through peers that are out west, specifically in the oil sands industry, they'll have jobs that are constantly on their job boards because they need so many people they can't fill those positions whatsoever. We tell our young apprentices or would-be apprentices in Ontario, if you want a job, can't hire you in Ontario because of apprentice ratio regulations, go out west and that's where you'll find opportunity.
But Mr. Oakley just said that under Merit Canada, there's a large group of companies that do hire construction workers.
I didn't say that. I said that some of our companies use the temporary foreign worker program, as is available to them.
No doubt. But is that something that you would like to encourage more or less of?
No, I think temporary foreign workers are extremely expensive, and our member companies are, you know, the average number of employees is less than 10. They are your local construction contractor in the local community, and they understand how important it is to hire locally. But if you want to talk about being able to hire unemployed workers, you know, you may not be aware of it, but most collective bargaining agreements, if there's an unemployed unionized construction worker and they go and work for one of our companies, their union will actually fine them. So that's a huge disincentive.
I do know those laws.
Okay, good.
I do know how they operate, but in terms of the companies you represent, you're now saying that the 55,000 member, the
3,500.
Yeah,
3,500.
that none of them actually use temporary foreign workers, or do you know whether they do or don't?
I know that some companies do. We don't keep a database on our members and how often they access the program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coder.
On commence à être très loin de l'étude.
We're getting very far from our study on infrastructures when we're talking about temporary workers. I've learned a lot today, Mr. Chairman. We've talked about the formula, the RAND formula, about lots of things, but not so much about infrastructure. And there are some things that you've said here very important, but we'll certainly have to look at these closer. We've talked about the Champlain Bridge because that was a specific federal project. We could talk about the bridge that's going to be built between the Detroit River International Crossing. And if there is a closed tender with unionized people only, you are saying this will have a direct impact on the infrastructure cost. That's a very important statement, and you're saying that the union reality will have a direct impact on the infrastructure costs. And is this in terms of productivity? Is this because I persist in believing that regardless of the situation, when you have people who want to shaft the system, they will continue to do it. And that's, I think, what we need to talk about. But if you have something specific to say.
Mr. OK2, is there any studies, specific studies regarding that assessment?
À ce niveau-là, pour les travailleurs syndiqués.
With respect to unionized workers, there's overtime that usually applies after 8 hours of work, which increase the cost. A non-unionized worker will be more flexible in this regard. Unionized workers are separated class by class. The carpenter has to do his work, the laborer has to do his work, and as Walter has explained, a non-unionized worker would be allowed to pick up a hammer or to do some painting through, because that's what could happen. And the shovel operator at the present time, if he's unionized, cannot get out of his cab, and he can't even clean his bucket, whereas a unionized, a non-unionized worker can do that. a non-unionized worker can work 10 hours a day without necessarily having the overtime. He can choose to do that, and there's very important costs related to this. And this is nothing to do when we haven't even talked yet about benefits. When I'm talking about $2 per hour that the unionized worker has to pay his union. And if we have an approximation of the number of hours that will be worked on that bridge, whether it be Windsor or Montreal, if we're talking about 10,000 hours of work at $2 an hour, there is a significant cost here. This is what I affirm. And you've also said that there are laws in Quebec that we have to respect and we can't change. I have challenged that legislation, and the excuse that I was given was that based on the historical facts of 1992, because of violence in construction sites, even in 2013, the milieu has not developed, and there will be more violence. So after this decision we saw last year, even if they were all unionized workers, there was violence on the sites, and I am asking the federal government to implement the decision of the Supreme Court.
Just a correction, as I understand, you're not suggesting that unions are driving up the price and driving down the quality. You're suggesting that the absence of competition is doing those things. Am I correct?
I'm suggesting that the unions will increase the price. Okay.
I'd like to get an answer from
it has nothing to do with the quality of the work.
I'm asking the other members as well of the panel. You're not here to suggest that union contracting is bad or inflationary. You simply here to suggest that there should be open competition for public infrastructure work.
Yeah, that's
correct.
Okay.
That's our position.
Okay.
And if union contracting is not, as you've just described, then they have nothing to fear from free and open competition, because they may in fact be lower cost.
And in Kitchener-Waterloo, can you describe what's happening now? You suggested that union-free contractors are facing a ban in that jurisdiction as well?
They're facing a potential ban right now. This is before the Ontario Labour Relations Board, and as I understand it, again, it was 2 unionized workers working on a Saturday, building a shed, I believe, of all things, when their union filed the application for certification through the card check system. And this will, I believe, cut out just over 80% of the open shop contractors in the Kitchener-Waterloo area.
The other point that I'd like to make is it not only shuts out open shop, or as some have referred to it, union-free employees, but also other unions. So the Progressive, or the Christian Labour Association of Canada, the CLAC, is a unionized shop, and they wouldn't be allowed to bid either. So it's not simply a union versus union-free issue. It's a specific union has 100% exclusivity on these contracts, and other unionized contractors that are affiliated with other unions can't bid. So you'll have testimony. I hope that you invite some of the other non-affiliated unions to appear here, who will likely argue the same point that we are.
So the ban extends beyond union-free workers
Absolutely.
to unionized workers who just don't happen to be part of the right union.
Exactly. That's what I said in my opening
So that
remarks.
further reduces the competition,
right,
and therefore raises the price for taxpayers.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and you were right on cue. Thank you again, Mr. Oakey, Mr. Pamick, Mr. DeMay, for being here, and appreciate your input and answers. So, just a reminder to committee that there will be no meeting on Thursday. I can see the disappointment in your eyes. The clerk has been scrambling to try and get witnesses, and it's a long list of ones that he contacted, so we had to make the decision, and we just couldn't get anybody. So there's a meeting next Tuesday, and if we don't see you before, see you next Tuesday.